I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now Show.
Hello. Welcome back to the Why Not Now Show. We are talking about storytelling today. It's one of my favorite topics. I think it's one of the most powerful tools in the world, if not the most. And it is everywhere, right? Everybody tells stories. Everybody can tell stories. And stories are shaping our world. Whether you look at politics, you look at the stories we tell ourselves in our minds, super powerful. You look at the stories we're sharing with the world, the impression we're making. Really, stories are selling. Stories are persuasion. Even if you're not intending to be in a persuasive situation or making an influence on someone, stories are going to make an impact. That is your brand. You know, our stories are who we are, why we do what we do. It's a story. Steve Jobs said, "May the best storyteller win." Now, why did he say that? Because scientifically, it's proven that the most efficient, effective way to change human behavior is through storytelling. It's through sharing a story. It's not necessarily a bunch of data or sharing a ton of results or statistics. No, it's the human connection that happens from telling a story. That persuades more than any stat you could share. Now, if you wrap data around a story, there you go. That's a 1-2 punch. That's the secret weapon. And we're going to talk about that, by the way, using stories to get what you want, because there's a delta between where you are now and where you want to go. What lies between are stories. And it's incredibly powerful to be able to tell a story and make that human connection that converts. So humans connect with humans, not logos. And connection converts, and it compounds over time. So just for a little bit of background, one of the things that I'm known for in my career, especially many years ago, was helping people with their personal brands. I'm using air quotes because that term is like kind of nails on a chalkboard to me, because branding, as a classic marketer, trained and studied marketing, brands are iconic. They're static. They're perfect. They're polished. They have equity. They don't change. Humans are messy. Nothing about us is perfect, right? We're constantly changing, constantly in motion, not static. And so those two things don't necessarily go together. And you don't brand yourself. You are yourself. That creates your brand. So you don't brand yourself. You are you. That is your brand. Now, when we build this presence, this brand for ourselves by being ourselves and sharing stories, our presence can be present even when we are not. So what does that mean? That means you are able to persuade with your presence even when you're not in the room or you're not present physically. Incredible, because that is a way to scale yourself. So if that isn't reason alone to really focus on storytelling, I don't know what is. We can manipulate time through story. So you are in meetings that your presence and your persuasion is sitting at the table even when you're not physically there. So when we look at storytelling, what are some of the scenarios, even personally, not just professionally, but we're constantly, sharing our opinions, sharing our thoughts, whether it's in a formal setting and you're on stage and you are sharing your voice of authority to make an impact, or for your company, your career, whatever it is that you believe in. Or it could be just going to an event, and maybe you're meeting, other parents at the baseball field and you want to connect. That is a place for a story. City council. Maybe you're looking to propose soon. Maybe you're dating. It could be a presentation. It could be pitching for investment. Whatever the scenario is, we're all in sales, believe it or not, right? We're all selling something, even if it's just our smile. So coming from professional sports, years ago, before even social media existed, and we didn't have the term influencer, by the way, there was something called a Q score. I'm not sure if it's still around or still used, but a Q score was a way to really measure the power and influence of athletes, talent, celebrities. And if I recall correctly, there were two main factors, likability and favorability. Favorability? I'm pretty sure. Anyway, you can Google and correct me. But basically, your ability to convert, influence, persuade, that's your Q score, right? It doesn't necessarily mean how well you performed on the court. You may not be the best player, but you may be a fan favorite. We can all use a little uplift in our Q scores, right? Likability is not a bad thing. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on today is something that I share in my keynotes. I'm constantly telling stories, and that's just part of the edutainment because I'm trying to make an impact and create connections that convert into some sort of feeling and behavior by the time I'm done. And I just actually got back from giving a talk at a Marriott conference, so hospitality, big global hospitality brand. And I did a keynote and also did a workshop breaking down these elements. I won't do all of it, but I'm going to share some of the high points. Now, this formula is something I also share in much greater depth with Renegade at the Renegade Accelerator. It's part of the curriculum. It's part of what we focus on as Renegades, female leaders, executives, founders, to share your thought leadership, to be able to make an impact on stages or in boardrooms, in presentations, in politics, whatever it is, that ability to connect is huge. So a lot of Renegades are working on upping their public speaking game, something I've been doing for many years. And hopefully I've gotten a little better over the years, right? Every overnight success is 10 years at least in the making. And I've been doing this for 15, maybe even closer to 20. And the practice is everything, as you can imagine. But I've learned tips and tricks and things that work for me, but also work in business. So a lot of times with storytelling, you might get an amazing creative that will teach you how to tell a story, but they may not have that business acumen or that understanding of how decisions are made and how the data fits in and how you need to actually be able to convince and make that connection that ultimately converts and hopefully compounds over time. So a lot of times I'm brought in to talk to sales teams or marketers or whoever else and explain, how we can connect those two. And I'll share the specific formula for you. So even if you're not in a business realm where you feel like you could use story, my mom, who is a badass and she still rides her horse like a champ and is 69 years old, she can still use some storytelling skills because she's still persuading and convincing maybe her riding coach to teach her new things, who knows, or my dad to whatever it is to watch the movie she wants to watch, not his, who knows. We can all persuade. We can all use some good persuasion power. Okay, so when we look at a go-to story, what is that? What does that mean? So I look at the heart and soul of a story as potency, a 2 to 3 minute gem. It's kind of like an anchor. It's a moment in time that you have in your pocket and you can pull it out at any moment, right? I have a whole portfolio of these. And over the years, I'm adding constantly. But the point of those stories is modular. So we can actually change and use those stories in different ways over time, right? And a lot of times I still am known for this one story that I've told again and again and again, thousands of times, about the first time I met Shaquille O'Neal. And it really did change the trajectory of my life. We're actually going to show you that clip here in a minute because I'm going to make some points around it that you can refer back to and give you an example. But if you've ever seen me speak, then you've definitely heard some of my stories. The time I had my son almost on an airplane by myself on a layover. There are 3 or 4 different ways that I land that story to make the point I'm making. And it evolves over time. So you want a handful, right? Just start with one. And let me explain what a go-to story is. So you want a handful of go-to stories. And let me explain the goal of a go-to story. We are trying to create emotional connection. And what do I mean by that? Physiologically, we want resonance. We want a reaction. And I'll share how to get that. That will create a pathway to conversion. And by conversion, I mean you might just get someone to agree with you, right? Let's say you're dating and you're telling a story. Your Q score is important if you're dating, right? You also can use a go-to story to build relationships, establish credibility, relatability, relevance. You can use a go-to story to, as I said, apply different endings. So it's something that can be versatile. You can use go-to stories to educate. So these are 2 to 3 minute snippets of a specific thing that happened in time that you're going to use to persuade. And it's a potent moment in time. It's not a season. So we want a specific moment, not 10 years or a year or so on and so forth. And again, they're tight and they're short. They may be 1 minute. Now, when do we use these go-to stories? It could be in casual or formal situations. It could be at a networking event, which I personally am allergic to. So I'm always hoping that someone entertains me and tells a story. I have a handful of go-to stories that I use at networking events because I can't stand small talk. You can use a go-to story to reset a healthy tension situation. If you find a conversation's going sideways or a scenario is like, oh gosh, we really took a wrong turn back there, you can usually get it back, bridge it to a story and get back to that connection, that relatability, that empathy, that human, humans connect with humans, not logos, and connections convert. So remember, you don't brand yourself, you are yourself. Stories, best way to translate and convey who you are. And then even repairing a relationship, you can definitely use a go-to story. Now, you're thinking, okay, what type of story is this? Give me some examples. Here are some thought starters of where you might go looking for a story, the type of stories. It could be the most adverse moment in your career. It could be a situation when you were a child and you had to be brave. It could be someone else's story that you've overheard or that you witnessed firsthand, right? It doesn't even have to be your story. There's a story I tell all the time about Steven Spielberg on the set of Jaws and this mechanical shark that they had, and they were over budget and they were way behind schedule. And he said, I'm not using that really expensive shark we just built. It's not scary. It's broken. And he just used music. I tell it in present tense because that's part of the go-to story that I'll get to in a moment. But I bring that out maybe once a month in some scenario, in a meeting, or because he was so creative in reinventing the way things were done. He didn't even show the shark, right? If you think about it, everyone on set was like, dude, first of all, he was a young gun. He was up and coming. This was his shot as a director. And everybody's like, you're not going to show a shark? And the name of the story is Jaws? Like, good luck, buddy. He was on an island, kind of literally. And he did, and it ended pretty well, right? The music is what was the highlight. So it could be someone else's story. It could be an interview that you had. It could be a story you bring out at interviews. It's kind of like a go-to story of a scenario. Like I said, it could be a well-known story of someone else's. So go looking around in there and don't overthink it, but just start with something. The first thing you think of is usually a good intuitive hit that you're onto something. So write down a couple of things and just play with it, right? This is Play-Doh. Now, a quick tip about identifying that go-to story. And this is just for learning purposes, right? You can have a million of these. We want a potent moment in time. So as I teach this to renegades, and part of, the curriculum is they go think of a go-to story, they work on it, they've got the architecture and the calculus, and they come back and actually present it. And we do it over and over, and I coach them, and the Mavericks who are trained at Renegade coach them. Well, usually the story that they come back with is like 5 times longer than it needs to be, right? So we are going to cut this thing down. And there are moments in life that are potent, but they are everyday moments that just happened to be at the right time in our lives with all the right dynamics, right? All the right things and all the wrong things happened the same day. And what would have been an ordinary day became totally extraordinary, right? Those are great too. They do not need to be some epic, huge, crazy, life-changing thing. They don't need to include a celebrity. It's those moments that are relatable, because that's so key. So here is a really important point. You have to feel conviction in your story in order to convince. We have to feel conviction in order to be convincing, is what I say. It's my little rhyme. You have to be believable, which means you really do have to feel conviction and passionate and or real about what you're telling, right? It has to mean something to you. And it doesn't need to be the most epic thing ever, but you cannot have a believability problem with your go-to story, because people will sense it from a mile away, right? We've all seen that. So make sure that you feel strongly about what you're saying. And it's okay if you're thinking of a story and you're like, I'm not like super fired up about that. That's okay. You can find ways to fire yourself up as long as you believe it, right? But if you find it really boring and you can't find a way to make it interesting, probably not a good place to start. So certain things just light us up. That's what we want. We do not want a believability problem. We can't have that if we're going to try and persuade. So I mentioned that one of the goals is to push buttons physiologically on our audience, right? This could be an audience of 1. It could be an audience of 10,000. It could be personal. It could be professional. But we want to push buttons literally and trigger physiological reactions, like having them feel like they were there, that it's happening now. So one of the things about delivering a go-to story, yes, it's short in length. You keep it tight. You tell your story in present tense. So as it is happening right now, for the first time, you are bringing your audience into that moment, into that experience. And our bodies don't know the difference. But if we feel like we are there, we are going to get the same reaction physiologically as if we really are there, right? So that's what you're doing, is you're transferring that emotion, that connection, that physiological conversion to your audience by bringing them into the present moment. It is happening now, live. So, for example, I'm sitting at my desk in Austin, Texas, right? Having an athletic brewing. It's getting later here. I wasn't sitting. I was sitting. No, that's past tense. I am sitting. I'm sitting, right? And it is not easy for us to necessarily tell stories in present tense because we're not used to that. And so it takes some practice. And oftentimes, I still do this. We accidentally start toggling back and forth between past and present. And that's okay. Nobody's likely going to notice because it's so, there's a nuance there that most people don't pick up on. But keep practicing in present tense. It's happening now. And what will happen is that power of transition or transfer, you're transferring the physiological response. Someone else is likely going to get goosebumps. Their palms will be sweaty. You know, when someone's telling you something and you're feeling it and your heart's racing. Yeah, you're not even there. They're not even there anymore in that story. But they brought you there in a moment in some random place at a networking event or whatever, or an Uber. Ubers are a great place to tell go-to stories and practice them. So you can't fake this believability. We want to make sure we transfer the physicality. And, one of the things that's so cool is our imaginations and what we think and what we imagine can have the same response as the reality of where we are. So we want to make sure that this story is tight. And think of jump cuts. So if you're not familiar, in movies, in television. The directors have different tools they can pull to create the magic, and one of which is called a jump cut. What is that? Well, that is you're watching a movie and you don't witness the main character go from the house to the grocery store, but they got there. And the director doesn't even need to shoot that or show you. You're able, as someone viewing, to make that connection, right? We got it. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to show it. We can quickly jump from here to here. And humans are pretty intelligent, and we will come along, right? There are so many elements of stories that we can cut. So it is easy to take something complicated and make it longer. And just like if you're writing a book or making a point, yeah, anybody can type out forever and have all of this back up in these thoughts and have a long email. But can you turn that into a 2-sentence email? That's much harder to simplify what's complex. So we want to do that. And sometimes it's just edit and delete as much as possible. So much so that you might have to add things back in. That's when you've deleted enough. But there are moments in your story that may seem trivial, but they're actually really important. I remember this renegade once telling a story about the fact that it was fall. And as she was walking in her cute shoes that were relatable, and she quickly gave one description of the shoes, and everybody that had ever had those shoes was like, yeah. She was crunching on the leaves, and we knew it was fall, and I could just see those shoes on the leaves, right? And hear that sound, and I love crunching leaves. So that got me. But there are things that are important. So if you could bring that person in there and they can hear the leaves crunching, awesome. So we're keeping it short, telling it in present tense. Do not memorize this story. It'll totally screw you up. In any situation, I am trying to find ways to not have to rely on my memory, right? Whether it's public speaking or it's telling a story or it's a presentation, a pitch, I encourage you, do not memorize. Don't rely on just your memory. I can show you a couple tricks of how to get it in your bones, but you live the story or you heard it. It's storytelling. It shouldn't be the same exact every single time. In some cases, some of my stories end up being because they're in my bones, and it almost is the same, but not exactly like word for word necessarily. It is important that we don't put that much pressure on remembering in the moment, because when you're telling a story, you already have a bit of a spotlight on you, whether it's a party of one or a party of many. You're on stage per se, even if it's virtual. So that physiologically is already going to be more, there's going to be more happening, more data that you're computing. What are they thinking? Last thing on earth humans want is to be embarrassed. So we're constantly wanting to not make a fool of ourselves, not say the wrong thing. So that really jacks up any kind of script or memory that we're leaning too heavy on. So there are other ways to do that. And then inject your personality. I mean, that should go without saying, but a go-to story is not something that you want to use as the first time you're just trying to, turn up the dial on your comedy. If you're not naturally funny or naturally, intense or passionate about something, don't start now. Be yourself. Absolutely. And the passion that you feel for the story should come through, right? That's the believability, and that's ultimately what's going to differentiate you. So for the purposes of now and application, I'd like you to think of two go-to stories, one that's professional and one that's personal. So identify those and play along with me here. So now we are going to share a go-to story. This is one that I tell often on stage, and we'll come back to you constructing your go-to story, and we can use this one as a reference point. We're also going to talk about how to have a call to action and wrap data around your story if in the event you are in a sales position or you're specifically pitching something, you can use that calculus too. And I'm sitting at my desk. It's 2008. I'm working for the NBA's Phoenix Suns. And I'm the head of, for all of you that may or not be sports people, that's basketball. NBA is basketball. Some people, it's not their thing. So here I am sitting at my desk. I'm the head of digital media and research. Phone rings. It's Bob from basketball operations. Amy Jo, get down to the locker room right now. Shaq wants to learn how to tweet. You are the only one in this building that knows what that means. Come now. Now, when you work in the front office, and I'm working in marketing, it's not normal that you interface with the players. In fact, it's just not allowed. So with that in mind, I head to the locker room to meet Shaquille O'Neal. I figure I'll ask forgiveness instead of permission on this one. It should be fun. Hit the elevator, and let me time out really quickly. I'm a small town girl from Wyoming who grew up in a trailer. We have some Wyoming fans up there. This is the first time I've ever met a celebrity. I have never met anyone like this, and I definitely have never taught a celebrity anything. So I get down the elevator, and I walk over and look up, and there's 7-foot-tall Shaquille O'Neal. He hands me his Shackberry. It's 2008, his BlackBerry. And I proceed to give him a Twitter tutorial and start to get to know him. And I had these ideas for him. And my goal was to show who the Shaquille was behind the Shaq. Who was the person, the human, behind the personality that we see on TV. Here's the thing. You don't brand yourself. You are yourself. And that creates a brand. Again, can you say it with me? You don't brand yourself. You are yourself. And that creates a brand. Well, not too long after that, we're headed to play the Lakers. I'm on the team plane, and I'm sitting in the way back. The player's in the front. The plane has not taken off yet. I'm surrounded by our marketing partners who we're taking to LA to entertain them. And I'm sitting next to my boss, like the boss, the work, family, self boss. She's not a fan of mine. My hand had been slapped because I was told stop working with the players and stop with the social media stuff because we don't have rules yet for this. So I was in Twitter timeout. I'm sitting there. Shaquille sends me a text from the front of the plane. He says, "Can you come up here?" I just, absolutely not. I will get fired. Well, 7-foot-tall Shaquille O'Neal stands up and he says, "Get up here." Nothing a 7-foot-tall man does goes unnoticed, and everyone is looking at him and me. I stand up, I climb over my boss, and I walk up. Shaquille had forgotten his Twitter password. I'm gonna lose my job over this. I help him. Next thing you know, he's saying to his teammates, "You gotta hire her. She'll help you build your brand online, and look at what I'm doing in this social media stuff." I said, "Shaquille, they can't hire me. I work for the team." And he said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't." Well, I turn around with my tail between my legs, the walk of shame. I know for certain I'm taking a Southwest Airlines flight back to Phoenix because I'm getting fired. I step over my boss. My butt hits the seat, and my boss turns and looks at me and says, "Amy Jo, you were a renegade." And I secretly loved the sound of that. That was the moment. That was my why not now moment of bravery that I capitalized on. I sent Shaquille a text and I said, "That's it, I'm starting my own company." And he wrote back right away and said, "Great, I'll be your first client." Okay, welcome back. So that is a story that I am asked to tell still to this day. I just did a keynote, and one of their directives and specs that they had was make sure Amy Jo tells the Shaq story. So the president of that organization had seen and heard the story at a different event, and they're like, yes, we just got to make sure that story, make sure she tells it. So that happened many years ago, but I'm still telling that story, still changing small details, refining it. It has 4 or 5 different landings, and meaning like points when I say landing. And that story has unlocked a lot of opportunity for me in my career, but also a ton of business, right? Like that story has been lucrative, and the focus and the commitment to get better and better. There are moments that I inject little things now, even since that was shot, has created the opportunity to make an even quicker, deeper personal connection with whoever's listening. And that's just currency that you carry with you. So here's the thing about storytelling, just like any creative process, it is not linear. It's messy. Anytime, I'm creating, writing, it feels one moment like I'm just game on, grand slam, I am jamming, nailed it. And then it might be the next hour and I'm like, this is terrible. I don't even know what I'm doing, right? It's a creative process, right? It's going to go up, down, and all around. It's nonlinear. But you are going somewhere. So know that there will be progress as long as you're giving it some attention and focus and trust the process, right? It's messy and it's uncomfortable. So the ingredients of a go-to story, the actual architecture, here are 4 parts to start, right? Number 1, you have an opener. This is a one-liner. That's all this is. And I'll give you examples. One of the hardest things for people in terms of telling stories is how to get started, right? How do I transition? How do I get into it? So you've got your opening line. Then you have the heart, the go-to story, the, let's say, 2-minute specific thing that happened, whether it's your story, someone else's, something you witnessed. Then you have a bridge, and I call it the bridge to persuasion. This is what's going to transition you from your go-to story to the actual point, right? This is where you're going to land the plane. So imagine the opening line, you're taking the plane off, it's going up, go-to story, you're flying. The bridge down, you start descending, the bridge to persuasion, it's one line, and then you land the plane, you make your point. And sometimes that point changes. Same story, same opener maybe, and it could be 5 different endings. Now, there is a 5th part, and that is if you're specifically, for business purposes or in a professional setting, using data and a call to action. Okay, so that's the 5th thing. So we've got the opener, opening line, one-liner. We've got the go-to story, couple minutes. We have the bridge to the persuasive payoff, right? That's the coming down. We have the landing, the actual payoff. This is the point of the story. And then to follow on to that, the 1-2 punch, the data you wrap around it, you can share your stats, your results, your numbers with a specific CTA, call to action. That is a request. That is an ask. That's where the money is. Okay. So now what are these one-liners? Because oftentimes we can get our story down, but it's like, how do I enter in? Right? You're at a cocktail party and you just met someone and all of a sudden you're just going to tell a childhood story. Probably not super easy to just get into that. You have to have, a ramp, both going up and coming down. And the coming down part, that's the other thing. It's like, this is what makes these modular. Modular? Yeah. Changeable, right? Versatile. We have to have this bridge to that persuasion and that payoff. And that transition is key because we got to get to the point. But sometimes it's like, okay, I can kind of get there from this story and making that point, but it might be a little bit of a stretch. Well, there are quick ways to make that stretch. So that's usually the hardest part for people. If you're new here, welcome. If you're a longtime listener, thank you so much for being on the ride, and to everyone in between. So a couple ways we can stay connected. I'd love to be synced on social. Amy Jo Martin is my handle on social, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, if you use that, all the things. Also, we can connect through the newsletter. So amyjomartin.com/newsletter is where I share updates, and it's all about value there, right? This isn't spam and promotional. I know the game, and that's not how it works. So you will only get the cool things that I'm seeing that I feel are relevant to Renegades personally and professionally. And it's fun, it's exciting, and hopefully you can join us there. Also, subscribe to the podcast. That would be amazing. We're on all the big platforms. Also, put this podcast on YouTube. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so on and so forth, all of the places. Additionally, we have a book. So I wrote Renegades Write the Rules. It's a New York Times bestseller. You can get that on my website, amyjomartin.com, or find it on Amazon or wherever. And then we do have a accelerator that we will be announcing. So the Renegade Accelerator is, if you're new here, something that we lead for female leaders, executives, founders who are really looking to take their game to the next level. And it's agnostic. It's among corporate as well as entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, people in venture capital, people in healthcare, physicians. I mean, it's across nonprofits. It's across every industry, and that's the value. But senior level women who are learning to amplify their voice, get on more stages, share their thought leadership, get on boards, start investing. We have investing opportunities and teach how to do that. But more than anything, it's a container of a hug and a bit of a kick in the ass, as well as a lot of value exchange from an intellectual capital standpoint. So that's my spiel. You can go to renegade@amyjomartin.com and just put the word Renegade Accelerator in the subject line. We can get you more info, or go to renegade.global. And you can click in and learn more. So we'll be launching dates for the next one soon. More than anything, thank you for being here. And we have 300 some episodes in our archive here, so you can dig back. Most of them are extremely evergreen, so you wouldn't even know when they were aired, and some brilliant minds. So thank you for being here, and back to our conversation. So here are some examples of very specific one-liners. These are openers for your go-to story. This is the plane on the ramp taking off. Opener number 1. Let me tell you about a critical moment when, and launch right into that go-to story. Opening number 2. Let me tell you about a specific situation where I realized we can unlock more conversions. And that's pretty business-y, but when you tell someone they're going to unlock more conversions, that's money on the table, right? Like ears are going to be listening. They're perking up. So opener number 3. I was listening loudly to a customer the other day, and XYZ happened, right? And this could be something you witnessed. This was something a point that you're launching into this go-to story, and this happened. Another example of an opener. Our data is telling us we are leaving money on the table. Here's a story and an example of what the numbers are trying to tell us. Not too bad, right? Leaving money on the table, you're going to get some attention. Another really easy opener is just, let me take you back to the mid-2000s. I'm sitting at my desk I'm standing in wherever you're standing. Let me take you back, right? Let me tell you a story you can do that too. That's just as easy. But when you tell someone right out of the gate, you're going to share some data, but first they need to listen to the story, or you're leaving money on the table and this story example is an example of what the numbers are trying to share from real life. What you're about to do is share human proof, right? Because stories are human proof. Like, it's real data that happened, maybe a data point of one, but usually you have a trend that you're trying to make an example of and use to persuade. Maybe it's for more budget, maybe it's to change a strategy, whatever it is, change allocation. That story is what's going to connect, and the data will back it up. Okay, so then you go into your story, right? We're telling it in present tense. We want it to be relatable. We want to make sure that we're injecting some credibility in there. It doesn't have to be bragging. It doesn't have to be, name dropping. It's really anything that will nod to your experience and refer to your experience. And it might just even be, in my experience, when we generated XYZ results, right? It may be referring to experience from a different job. Whatever it is, you can refer to the fact that you have done this before. Sometimes we're educating, right? We have to have credibility, but we want to sprinkle it in like salt. We can't overdo it. And then relatability is huge, right? So even if I'm telling you a story about someone that I've worked with that's high profile, I'm going to be trying to find a way to add some humility in there too, because the last thing on earth I want is for people to feel like I'm sharing something from up here and talking down or not relatable, or my point doesn't land because they're thinking, oh yeah, well, sure, that works for a celebrity. That's not me. I'm constantly using that juxtaposition of a small town girl from Wyoming, grew up in trailer parks. Like, if I can get that in there, that's going to help me, because what I'm basically saying is, if I can do this, so can you, right? I did not start with from here. I didn't have this, certain pedigree per se. And it's also humor, not necessarily self-deprecation, but humor in general is one of the quickest ways to connect. And that is something to play with and have so much fun with. I'm still taking stories, things that happened years ago that are great stories, but injecting a little bit here and there. And it's kind of like acting. So over the years, I have been able to study from different speaking coaches, or in some cases, actual actors who maybe were even on Broadway, and they don't memorize things necessarily just with their minds. They're using their bodies. They're using positioning and movement and physical location as anchors to be able to remember really long scripts and dialogue. So humor has been something that I've really been trying to play with, where you might just in your delivery or add one tiny detail and it changes the game. So for example, I have this story that I tell, I'm sitting in my happy seat, 30,000 feet in the air, getting things done. There are no distractions, but I think I feel a contraction. Data point, I'm 6 months pregnant, heading to Coachella with a layover in Denver. And I tell this story about going into labor and Googling Braxton Hicks and self-diagnosing, and we finally land the plane and I don't know what to do, and I'm on the phone with my doctor. Well, if you're at DIA, if you've ever been to Denver International Airport, there's long runways. Well, a friend of mine who's funny and they've just got this awesome, very dry sense of humor was working with me on this story. And there are times where it's very intense because I do have the baby. He's a 2-pounder, Lincoln. Many of you know the story. He's just turned 5 in April. He's healthy, but it was pretty freaking dramatic, right? I'm on a layover having a baby by myself at 6 months, almost in the airport. They got me to the hospital in time. And it's up and down, it's emotional. But what's super fun is, people are listening and they want to make sure, what's going to happen? And my friend, who's awesome at comedy and timing, said, why don't we inject a little bit of the atmosphere that everybody can relate to? For example, Auntie Anne's, right? Everybody knows that smell. When you're at an airport, you can tell if there's an Auntie Anne's around the corner. But So I have this point in the story where talking to my doctor on my cell phone. I can barely move. I'm on the rocking, flat escalator at DIA, and I look over and I said, I am not having this baby today in front of Auntie Anne's. I'm going to Coachella, and I only have one wristband. And it's this moment where it's intense, then it's light. It's intense, and it's light. And you find that groove. Anyway, I get excited about those little things because you can try them on and get a reaction, right? And so the first time I did that and people laughed, I was like, wow, that was like one sentence. And we just created a physiological response and connection in these people, and it brought them closer. So have fun is my point. I have so much fun with telling stories, and you're never done. You can constantly refine. There's still things about the Shaquille story. I have a little moment where, he asked me, well, what do I say on social? And I say, you don't brand yourself, you are yourself. That creates the brand. Share the Shaquille behind the Shaq. And although I don't know that I actually said this, it's for the purposes of edutainment. I did say, people can see what you do on TV. We want to know why you do it. They can see that you are an all-star. You are an MVP. You are an incredible basketball player. Struggle with the free throws a little bit. So I throw that aside in there. And people laugh, and I say, oh, I didn't say that yet. And it's just the timing is fun, and it just adds this level of, okay, I'm going to relax. I'm going to be entertained. My guard's down if I'm in the audience, and listen to what this woman has to say. And I'm much more likely to reach them with the message that's coming next, right? So have fun. Okay, so bridge. So we've got the takeoff, the opener, the one-liner. We've got the story. Then we're going to bridge to the landing. We're descending now, right? This is a one-liner to get us to transition from the story to the point, to the payoff, to that persuasion. Here are a few examples of a bridge. Example number 1. In that moment, it became clear that, make your point, right? Land the plane. In that moment, it became clear is the bridge, land the plane. Make the point. And again, you may have 10 different ways to land it, but that's where that persuasion and that payoff is happening. It's the point of the story, and you better have one, because if someone's taking the time to listen to you, then they want to make sure there's some value in there, and that's the value, is the point. Okay, here's another really easy bridge, very literal. I use this one specifically in a go-to story that I'm often pulling out of my back pocket. And it's literally, and here's why this story is important, right? Pretty matter of fact. You might be thinking, yes, thank you, Captain Obvious. But sometimes that's the hardest part, is to get from here to here, because you're in it. You're telling the story. And now it's time to land the plane, right? We got to make it potent and have it stick. Okay, here's one more example. Love this one, especially in a business situation. That was the moment I realized we're leaving money on the table, and we have to increase our spend in XYZ category or period, right? That was the moment I realized we are leaving money on the table. Powerful, right? Then that's your bridge. Then you're going to land it, because la 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 la. We're not spending, we're not, it could be about customer service. It could be about sales. It could be about a marketing channel. It could be, who knows? So just to recap, we've got the one-liner. This is the opener, and we're taking off. Let's just pretend this is a plane, right? Runway up in the air. In the air, we've got the story. Tight, potent, conviction. We're going to land the plane, but before we do, we have to bridge. We have to descend with our bridge, our payoff persuasion bridge. And then boom, we're going to pay it off. We're going to land that thing. All right? And the point should be tight. And we don't want 5 points. We want 1 point, right? and this and this and this. No. If we find ourselves saying, and then I went here, and then I did, and then time out, yellow flag, cut. Potent moment. Okay, now let's say you have some data to back this story up, and it's compelling, and you've created decks, and no one's opening your decks, and you're in the same situation with stakeholders where you are there to convince them. You've got one more shot, and you do the opener, you tell the story, you descend, you land the plane, and here comes the data to back it up with a call to action. So here's a data and call to action example. So you land the plane, and then you say, here are the numbers to back this up. Here's the data. We saw a 30% increase, XYZ. We saw X% change over time. We're seeing this trend. We saw this type of a lift, so on and so forth. And you say, that demonstrates the power of increasing our spend for new customer acquisition. I recommend we XYZ, increase the spend by fill in the blank, and then stop talking. Don't keep going, just stop. And see what their reaction is, right? So what we're doing is getting that emotional connection, sharing the numbers, and the recommendation, the specific call to action. Okay, let me give you some more examples. You land the plane, give some stats, and you say, this demonstrates why it is critical that we do XYZ in order to have an impact on our ROI, or in order to generate more revenue, in order to XYZ, right? And then you say, I recommend. So we want the data and the specific relationship between the data and what you're about to recommend, which is your call to action, all wrapped at the end of the go-to story plane, right? So the plane is landed, and now it's time you're going to make the ask, right? So we got the numbers, and that demonstrates why we need to increase budget by 20%, which I recommend we do in Q4. Stop talking. Then we stop talking, okay? All right, what you can do as well, if you feel like your audience, maybe it's a party of one and it's your supervisor or the ownership group or whatever, is not likely going to listen to your story unless they know you've got some money behind it and you're going to generate more revenue with it somehow. You can start with a little data, tell the story, then dive into the data a little more and pay it off with that call to action and recommendation. So you can wrap it on both sides, right? That's fine too. And it kind of depends on your audience. You can tease it, tell a story, tell the whole, context and the whole comprehensive package of the data, full picture. What do you recommend? Call to action. So confidence is key, as you could imagine, and practice is important. So the story itself can be playful, it can be funny, it can be serious, it can be whatever. But the wrapping the data around, the landing, the bridge to the landing, even the launching in, that's what sometimes is the hardest part. So that's where you really, really want to make sure that you have tried this on. And again, you can use your family, your friends, your dog, your Uber driver. Try these stories out. Now, confidence comes from competence, doing, and also community, in my experience. So creating and having a container like we do at Renegade where there's like-minded, like-hearted individuals who will listen, who will give you feedback, who make you feel psychologically safe, that is what we want, right? It might just be one person, but you can also video yourself, of course. I'm going to leave you with a couple of, I'll call it like things to warm up potential persuasion situations. Okay, so these are my go-tos for a situation where, I'm wanting to connect quickly. It may be fairly cold, or I don't know where my in is, or there's awkward silence. And a few of the things that I love to ask are, what are you working on right now that you're most passionate about? Or it could even be, you can put work aside. What are you focused on right now that you're most passionate about? It doesn't have to be work, right? That's a much better question than, what do you do? When people ask that question, like, what do you do? It's just a boring question. It's weird. It's awkward. It's fine, but come to them with a story. Before I answer that, let me tell you why I do it. And it's because the situation happened to me. Let me take you back to, you know what I mean? Before I tell you what I do, I want to tell you why I do it, which takes me to this moment in time. Yeah, I'm sitting at my desk. Another question you can ask, just whether it's Zoom or an audience, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing today? Where are we at? And this is going to do a couple things. A, it's showing you're listening, which means you care. It makes them check in with themselves and kind of think and calibrate, okay, where am I? I'm out of 5. You're going to know the delta and the opportunity for advancement there that you can make. And it just gives them a quick, okay, level set. It shows that you're interested. And you can check back in with them midway. How are we doing? 8? Are you 10 yet? So it's a one way to ease in. Another thing, I learned this from Sales Wizard. She sold huge multi-million dollar partnerships and sponsorships. And she would ask, and she'd find her way in, she wouldn't launch with this, but she would quickly get to, so what's keeping you up at night? And it was such a brilliant question and such a brilliant approach, because if you can get them to share, they're vulnerable, you're going to know what's on their mind. And it might be funny. It might be, serious. It might be something you have no power necessarily, perceived control over. But if you can work toward that and show you care and actually have compassion and or find a way to refer back to it, and maybe there's an angle of solution somewhere, that is gold, right? If you can help someone through or even be there to bear witness what they say of what's keeping them up at night. And if it's in their job, usually, what's the thing? And solve for that, your relationship, you're showing value, right? You are showing value big time. So that's a super fun one too. And the last kind of persuasion prompt when you're trying to warm up someone, this is specifically in meetings. I guess it could be other things too, but I think I learned it because I started at an ad agency, and ad agencies are kind of supposed to be the fun part of the client's day, the brand, right? They're in the corporate world and you're in the fun agency where there's snacks and ping pong tables and creatives and stuff and ideas, chaos. So just saying, my goal is to be the fun part of your day and maybe even give you back some time in your day, right? So if you can just lead with that, and it kind of just sets the tone of, okay, this is going to be different. It's going to feel different, hopefully, or the perceived and the desire, intention to be different is there. So storytelling, it's everything. I mean, just tell me a story. I love sitting around a dinner table and someone, what's your best story? Team meetings, we start team meetings with someone does a go-to story. How cool is that? And everybody wants to tell a story. You can tell stories with our kids, teach them how. It is the ultimate tool. And I hope that you enjoyed this and found some value in it. And if you have a story, share it on social, tag me. I'd love to hear it. Send it to me. And I love to coach people too. I think it's the long lost director in me that maybe I was a director in a different life, or maybe I will be down the road. Okay, so happy storytelling to you, and may the best story win.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?